We like to believe that we are the protagonists of our own lives. But to a falling steel beam or a pressurized tank, you are just soft biological matter against a solid backdrop of momentum. Today, we document 6 instances where the timeline of human life was interrupted by a millisecond of bad timing. We analyze the mechanics of tragedy for educational purposes. Do not attempt to recreate anything shown. The morning of April 3, 2017, in St. Louis, Missouri, was defined by the heavy, humid silence of routine inside the administrative building of Faultless Healthcare Linen, where 3 people sat in a nondescript room insulated from the gritty industrial world outside by layers of drywall and perceived safety. Tanya Gonzalez Suarez, a 45-year-old diligent worker, Christopher Watkins, a 21-year-old starting his adult life, and Clifford Lee, 52, were engaged in the most harmless activity imaginable, filling out new hire tax forms and listening to a human resources presentation, sitting in a sanctuary where the biggest threat should have been a paper cut, unaware that 300 feet away, the laws of thermodynamics were conspiring to erase them in a fraction of a second. Across the street, at the Loy Lang Box Company, a massive steel vessel known as a semi-closed receiver was operating under immense stress. A pressurized tank the size of a minivan designed to hold high-temperature steam. But this machine harbored a secret defect that no one had noticed. For years, the bottom of the tank had been slowly eaten away by the silent, invisible cancer of corrosion, thinning the steel from a robust barrier to a fragile skin no thicker than a coin, turning the vessel into a hidden bomb. At exactly 7:59 a.m., the tensile strength of the metal finally surrendered to the internal pressure, failing catastrophically and triggering a BLEV, boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, where the bottom of the tank ripped open and the high-pressure water inside instantly flashed into steam, blasting downward against the concrete floor with the force of a bomb. According to Newton's third law, this downward blast launched the entire 3,000-pound steel cylinder upward like a rocket, tearing through the factory roof as if the steel beams were made of wet paper and ascending into the gray morning sky on a terrifying parabolic arc. For a few surreal seconds, the steel beast soared silently over the rooftops of St. Louis, reaching an apex of roughly 500 feet before gravity reclaimed its hold, and the tank tipped its nose downward, locking onto its random coordinates with the precision of a guided weapon. It did not aim for the street or the parking lot. It aligned its trajectory perfectly with the Faultless Healthcare Linen office where Tanya, Christopher, and Clifford were likely just finishing a sentence, unable to hear the whistle of the incoming projectile because the object was falling at terminal velocity. The impact was absolute and merciless as the 3,000-pound torpedo slammed into the office roof carrying millions of joules of kinetic energy, punching through the shingles, wood trusses, insulation, and drop ceiling without slowing down to land directly in the center of the orientation room. The physics of the event were gruesome in their precision. The impact was not a collision but a displacement of space, creating a localized shockwave of overpressure and debris that left no margin for survival. The medical examiners would later describe the cause of death in clinical terms: blunt force trauma and catastrophic structural injury. But the reality was that the victims were erased from existence before their brains could even process the sensory input of pain. They were alive 1 second, planning their future, and in the next nanosecond, they were gone. Victims of a rogue variable from a system they didn't even know existed. The aftermath was a scene of haunting silence where the massive, rusted steel vessel sat in the middle of the crushed office, steam still hissing from its ruptured seams, an alien artifact resting in the ruin it had created amidst scattered papers and broken chairs. First responders found a geometry of death that defied logic, a factory disaster that had leapt across property lines to claim the lives of office workers, proving that safe zones are an illusion when a corroded circle of steel 300 feet away finally gives up the ghost. On the humid evening of July 10, 2006, The city of Boston was pulsating with the quiet, mechanical rhythm of modern infrastructure. And nowhere was this sense of engineered mastery more palpable than inside the connector tunnel leading to the Ted Williams Tunnel, the crown jewel of the Big Dig, the most expensive and complex highway project in American history, designed to move thousands of tons of steel and humanity beneath the earth in total safety. At approximately 11:00 p.m., a white 1991 Buick Century entered the westbound connector, gliding over the smooth asphalt under the hypnotic, rhythmic hum of yellow sodium lights. Driven by Angel Del Valle, 46, with his wife, Milena Del Valle, 38, sitting in the passenger seat. Both of them relaxed and heading toward Logan Airport, enveloped in the private universe of their car where the only sounds were soft conversation and the low rumble of the engine. They were protected by seat belts, airbags, and the assumption that the massive concrete world built around them was solid, static, and benign, completely unaware that directly above their heads, a silent and invisible failure had been maturing for 7 years. A betrayal of chemistry hidden in the dark crawl space of the tunnel's ceiling. Suspended above the roadway were massive concrete ceiling panels, each weighing 26 tons, roughly the equivalent of 5 full-grown elephants or a fully loaded semi-truck trailer, held in place not by mechanical bolts, but by a system of epoxy adhesive anchors drilled into the tunnel roof, a glue that was slowly suffering from a phenomenon known as creep, a microscopic deformation where the hardened chemical gradually turns back into a liquid-like state under constant load, losing its grip millimeter by agonizing millimeter over the years. As Angel and Milena drove toward the D Street portal, the structural integrity of the ceiling reached its mathematical breaking point, and the friction holding the massive slab against gravity evaporated instantly, with no creaking warning or falling dust to signal the danger, just a binary switch from secure to falling. At the exact millisecond the Buick Century passed underneath, Panel 90E0012 detached from the roof, and the 26-ton slab of reinforced concrete fell only a few feet. But with that mass, the distance didn't matter because the kinetic energy was absolute. The slab slammed down onto the roadway with a sound that resembled a bomb detonation, crushing the vehicle underneath it. But the physics of the impact were horrifyingly specific and acted as a colossal, jagged guillotine, because the car was moving and the slab fell at a slight angle. The concrete crushed the passenger side of the Buick flat against the asphalt, reducing the cabin height to mere inches in a fraction of a second, subjecting Milena Del Valle to catastrophic compressive forces that are medically described as instantly fatal. The structural failure of the vehicle's frame around her body occurred faster than the human nervous system could transmit a pain signal to the brain, meaning she did not die from the crash. She simply ceased to exist because the space she occupied was crushed by 52,000 pounds of stone. In a twist of cruel geometric probability, the driver's side of the car where Angel sat was partially spared the brunt of the direct impact because the slab had landed with a slight tilt, leaving a small, jagged pocket of survival on the left side, allowing him to crawl out of the wreckage through the shattered window, physically alive but standing in the ruins of his life, screaming into the dust-choked air of the tunnel. The tragedy of the Big Dig is a haunting lesson in the cruel reality, because the difference between life and death that night was not determined by driver skill, vehicle safety ratings, or decisions made by the victims, but strictly by the velocity of the car. If Angel had driven just 1 mile per hour faster, the slab would have fallen behind them, becoming a terrifying, near-miss story to tell at parties. And if he had driven 1 mile per hour slower, the slab would have crushed the engine block, stopping the car but likely sparing the cabin. Instead, they arrived at that specific GPS coordinate at the precise nanosecond required for the falling ceiling to intersect perfectly with the passenger seat, proving that Milena Del Valle was not a victim of a car accident, but a victim of a statistical anomaly where a timeline of engineering negligence and a timeline of a mundane airport run converged in the dark, turning a marvel of modern architecture into a tomb and leaving the world with a stark reminder that even the solid concrete sky above us is only as reliable as the chemistry holding it up. On the freezing afternoon of December 9, 1979, Shea Stadium in Queens, New York, was a chaotic arena of noise and excitement as 27,000 football fans gathered to watch the New York Jets face off against the New England Patriots, an event defined by the standard Sunday ritual of athletic aggression and crowd euphoria. In the stands, sitting relatively close to the field, was John Bowen, a 20-year-old man from Nashua, New Hampshire, who had traveled down with friends to enjoy the spectacle, blending perfectly into the crowd of parkas and wool hats, feeling the absolute safety that comes with being a spectator behind the concrete walls of a massive stadium. The first half of the game ended, the players retreated to the locker rooms, and the field was cleared for the halftime entertainment, a show put on by the Electronic Eagles, a local model airplane club invited to fly their custom-built radio-controlled aircraft for the amusement of the shivering crowd. The centerpiece of this performance was a bizarre, novelty aircraft designed to look exactly like a red push lawnmower, complete with a handle and wheels. A visual joke intended to make the audience laugh at the absurdity of a flying garden tool. However, beneath the painted styrofoam and balsa wood exterior, this machine was a serious piece of engineering, a 40-pound projectile powered by a screaming gasoline engine and equipped with a spinning propeller that acted as a high-speed cutting blade. To the naked eye, it was a toy. To the laws of physics, it was a dense, unguided missile waiting for a command failure. As the show began, the lawnmower buzzed through the air, performing loops and stunts, the whine of its engine echoing off the empty upper decks, while John Bowen watched from his seat, likely amused by the surreal sight, completely unaware that the invisible radio waves controlling the machine were about to be overwhelmed by the chaotic electromagnetic interference of the stadium. At roughly 1 p.m., the pilot, a skilled operator standing on the field, suddenly lost the connection. The invisible leash connecting his transmitter to the receiver inside the lawnmower snapped, likely due to a rogue radio signal from the press box or a simple mechanical glitch. The aircraft, now a rogue drone with a locked throttle, did not glide to a safety landing. Instead, it banked sharply and entered a steep, powered dive directly toward the stands. For a few confusing seconds, the crowd cheered, assuming this aggressive maneuver was part of the stunt, a fake crash designed to thrill them. But the laws of momentum do not understand comedy. The 40-pound machine accelerated as it dropped, its engine screaming at full RPM, transforming the novelty lawnmower into a kinetic weapon moving at over 40 miles per hour. John Bowen was sitting in a position where he had zero tactical options. He was boxed in by other fans, sitting on a hard plastic chair, looking up at an object that his brain struggled to categorize as a threat, until it was far too late to react. The plane cleared the protective railing and slammed into the seating area with the force of a sledgehammer, not hitting an empty aisle or a concrete step, but striking John Bowen and another spectator, Kevin Rourke, with catastrophic precision. The impact was gruesome and sounded like a dull thud that was audible over the low murmur of the crowd, as the spinning propeller and the sheer blunt mass of the engine block collided with Bowen's head. The medical reality of the injury was immediate and devastating. The toy inflicted severe cranial trauma and catastrophic injuries that were more consistent with a high-speed industrial disaster than a sporting event. The festive atmosphere of the halftime show evaporated instantly, replaced by a ripple of shock that spread through the section as spectators realized the stunt had just turned into a crime scene, and police and paramedics scrambled over the seats to reach the victim, who was slumped amidst the popcorn and debris. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, but the damage to his brain was irreversible, and he died several days later, becoming the victim of one of the most freakish accidents in sports history. He had done nothing wrong. He hadn't taken a risk, he hadn't entered a danger zone, and he hadn't ignored a warning sign. He had simply gone to a football game and was killed by a gasoline-powered garden tool that fell from the sky. The investigation that followed revealed no malice, only the cold probability of electronic failure, proving that in a world filled with machines, even a joke can become lethal if the signal drops at the wrong second. John Bowen's death serves as a dark monument to the chaos theory of life, a reminder that we can be taken out by the most absurd and unpredictable objects in the most public of places, while thousands of people watch, powerless to stop the descent of a red lawnmower turning into a grim reaper. On a seemingly innocuous afternoon in 2017, in the bustling municipality of Ipatinga, Brazil, Roberto Sousa was engaged in the most mundane of human activities, walking down a concrete sidewalk alongside his wife, enjoying the rhythmic, predictable comfort of a familiar route. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and the traffic was moving at a steady, monotonous pace on the adjacent highway, creating a background hum that usually signals a perfectly normal day. Roberto, a man in his 50s, was dressed casually, his posture relaxed, and his hands lightly swinging by his sides, his attention focused on the conversation with his partner, or perhaps just the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. He felt secure because he was observing the fundamental rules of the road. He was on the pedestrian path, separated from the rushing vehicles by a significant distance, heavy curbs, and the assumption that cars stay in their lanes and gravity keeps heavy objects on the ground. However, several hundred meters away, on the asphalt of the highway, a catastrophic mechanical failure was taking place that would rewrite the laws of probability for one specific pedestrian. A heavy-duty transport truck was barreling down the road when the lug nuts securing one of its massive wheels sheared off, likely due to hidden metal fatigue or improper torque application. In an instant, the wheel, a dense assembly of reinforced rubber and steel rim weighing nearly 200 pounds, liberated itself from the axle. Physics dictates that an object in motion stays in motion, but a runaway truck tire acts as a gyroscope, refusing to tip over, maintaining its upright balance with eerie stability while storing a massive amount of kinetic energy. It did not simply roll into a ditch. Instead, it hit an irregularity in the terrain and transformed into a high-velocity airborne projectile, beginning a chaotic, bouncing trajectory that would defy all logical expectations. This is where the story shifts from a traffic accident to a display of terrifying fatalism, as the wheel vaulted over barriers and traversed a vast distance that should have rendered it harmless, moving at speeds likely exceeding 50 miles per hour. It was silently closing the gap between the chaotic highway and the quiet sidewalk, and for several agonizing seconds, two timelines were converging. Roberto, walking slowly and peacefully, facing forward with his back to the danger, and the rogue wheel, soaring through the air in a series of high parabolic arcs. The most terrifying aspect of this event is the silence. A rubber tire bouncing on grass or asphalt does not scream like an engine or screech like brakes. It approaches like a ghost. Roberto had absolutely no sensory warning, no shadow cast in front of him, no sound of an approaching engine, and no vibration in the ground beneath his feet. He simply continued to walk, trusting the empty air behind him, completely unaware that a 200-pound missile was currently at the apex of its final bounce. Gravity, patient and absolute, pulled the object down with the precision of a guided weapon, calculating the descent to intersect perfectly with the back of Roberto's skull. The impact was shocking in its violence and speed, occurring faster than the human eye could blink. The heavy object, accelerating under gravity and carrying the kinetic energy of a falling piano, struck Roberto from behind and above, delivering a crushing blow that instantly overwhelmed the structural integrity of the human body. The medical reality is that the transfer of energy was so massive and instantaneous that the brain likely ceased functioning before the body even hit the pavement. The lights went out without a flicker. Roberto was driven into the ground as if struck by the fist of a giant, while his wife, walking mere inches away, was untouched physically but shattered psychologically. She stopped, looking down in confusion, her mind unable to process how her husband, who was alive and speaking a millisecond ago, was now lying motionless on the concrete. The tire, having delivered its fatal energy, bounced away innocuously, coming to rest a few yards further down the road, looking like a harmless piece of scrap rubber. This tragedy is perhaps the ultimate example of the wrong place, wrong second phenomenon, because of the sheer complexity of the variables involved. If Roberto had stopped to tie his shoe, if he had walked slightly faster, if the truck had been one lane over, or if the tire had hit the curb at a slightly different angle, the wheel would have passed harmlessly by. Instead, the universe aligned a mesmerizingly complex chain of physics. Friction, gravity, angular velocity, and trajectory to guide a loose object across hundreds of meters of obstacles to find the only human target in the vicinity. Roberto Souza did not die because of a mistake he made. He died because he was the final variable in a mathematical equation he couldn't see, struck down by a ghost from the highway while the sun was still shining on his face. On the windswept afternoon of September 8, 2009, the flat plains of North Platte, Nebraska, were being battered by a relentless gale, a weather system that turned the open landscape into a wind tunnel where gusts screamed across the asphalt at speeds exceeding 60 miles per hour. Amidst this invisible violence, Diana Durr, a 49-year-old woman known for her deep affection for animals, drove her Chevrolet pickup truck into the parking lot of a Taco Bell, a location that felt as mundane and predictable as any other slice of American suburbia. She was not there for fast food. She was there to complete a simple, neighborly transaction, having arranged to meet a couple from Wyoming to sell them 2 dog cages she had listed online. The parking lot was vast and largely empty, a sea of gray pavement offering hundreds of safe places to stop. But Diana, perhaps seeking shade from the midday sun or simply choosing the most prominent landmark to be easily seen by her buyers, pulled her truck into a spot directly beneath the towering roadside advertising sign. She turned off the engine, settled into the driver's seat, and likely checked her watch or her phone, enveloped in the false security of her vehicle's cabin, feeling the truck gently rock with the wind, but dismissing it as the standard background noise of the Midwest. She was completely unaware that she had just parked in the center of a danger zone defined by a structural defect hidden 75 feet above her head. The massive sign, a steel monolith designed to catch the eyes of drivers on the nearby interstate, was acting like a giant, rigid sail, catching the full force of the wind and transferring that immense energy down to a single, critical connection point on the main support pole. Unknown to the business owners, the city inspectors, or the woman sitting below, the well that held the massive advertising grid to the pole was compromised, suffering from metal fatigue, a microscopic network of cracks that had been slowly spreading through the steel for years, weakened by seasons of vibration and thermal expansion. As Diana sat waiting, the laws of metallurgy reached their absolute breaking point at approximately 1:15 p.m. The steel did not bend or warp. It snapped with the sudden, violent finality of a gunshot. The entire upper section of the structure, a grid of heavy steel beams and advertising panels weighing thousands of pounds, detached completely from its tether. Gravity took immediate and terrifying possession of the object. It did not drift away in the wind. Guided by the geometry of the brake, it plummeted straight down, a multi-ton guillotine falling from the height of a 7-story building. Inside the truck, Diana likely heard a groan of tearing metal, a sound too loud and too close to process, but human reaction time is measured in seconds, and gravity operates in milliseconds. The sign slammed into the cab of the pickup truck with the kinetic energy of a hydraulic press, crushing the roof down to the chassis in a fraction of a heartbeat. The physics of the impact were absolute and merciless. The passenger cabin, designed to protect occupants from highway collisions, simply collapsed under the vertical load, compressing the space where Diana sat into a fraction of its original volume. The medical reality of the event is stark. The structural failure of the cabin resulted in catastrophic blunt force trauma that was instantly fatal, ending her life before her brain could even register the darkness. The couple she was meeting arrived shortly after, pulling into the lot to witness a scene of surreal and haunting devastation. A quiet, empty parking lot, a broken pole reaching uselessly into the sky, and a crushed truck sitting alone under the debris, with the wind still howling indifferently around the wreckage. Responders who arrived at the scene were forced to bring in heavy industrial cranes just to lift the steel off the vehicle, a grim testament to the sheer weight that had fallen from the clouds. Diana Durr's death stands as a terrifying example of tragic precision, highlighting the fragile randomness of survival. She was the only person in a vast, open area, yet she occupied the exact 50 square feet of space that was destined for destruction. If she had parked one spot to the left, the sign would have crashed harmlessly onto the empty asphalt. If she had arrived 5 minutes later, she would have seen the debris on the ground. If the wind had gusted 5 minutes earlier, the space would have been empty. Instead, every variable in the equation, her punctuality, her choice of a landmark, the speed of the wind, and the hidden rot within the steel, aligned to create a singular, unavoidable moment of tragedy. She didn't take a risk. She didn't ignore a warning. And she didn't make a mistake. She simply stopped her car in the wrong shadow at the precise second when the steel sky decided to fall. On the quiet evening of June 19, 2007, the streets of Oakland, California, were settling into the cool calm of twilight as Humberto Hernandez, a 24-year-old man, walked down the sidewalk with his wife and young children, enjoying the absolute safety of a pedestrian zone. He was not jaywalking or taking risks. He was walking along a stretch of pavement designated as a sanctuary, separated from the roadway by a concrete curb, viewing the dangers of the world as abstract concepts rather than immediate physical threats. However, 50 feet away, a chaotic variable entered this peaceful equation when an SUV, driven by a man who had lost control due to a sudden error, veered sharply off the asphalt and plowed through the landscaping with violent momentum. The vehicle did not strike a person or a building. Instead, the front bumper collided directly with a cast-iron fire hydrant, a static object that acts as a capped volcano connected to the city's high-pressure water main. When the SUV struck the hydrant, the sheer kinetic force of the 2-ton vehicle sheared the bolts securing the heavy iron bonnet, creating a catastrophic structural failure where the water pressure, sitting at over 100 pounds per square inch, acted with the explosive force of a solid piston. The moment the bolts failed, the water blasted upward like a geyser. But first, it had to push the obstruction out of its way. The hydrant's iron cap and stem, a dense, jagged mass of metal weighing nearly 80 kilograms, roughly the weight of an adult man. The water pressure acted as the gunpowder in a cannon, launching the 176-pound iron projectile from the ground with a velocity that defied visual tracking, riding the tip of a high-pressure water jet that accelerated it to highway speeds in a fraction of a second. This is where the tragedy shifts from a car accident to a freakish act of ballistic fatalism. As the heavy iron object took flight, soaring through the air while spinning with terrifying kinetic energy to cross the distance between the crash site and the sidewalk. The trajectory was mathematically improbable, threading the needle between a utility pole, a fence, and the trees lining the street, moving silently and masked by the chaotic sound of the crash. Humberto Hernandez, walking with his back to the accident, likely heard the screech of tires and the crunch of metal, but he never saw the missile coming as the 80-kilogram iron cap struck him in the back of the head and upper body with the force of a falling anvil. The transfer of energy was absolute and clinically devastating, causing catastrophic blunt force trauma and immediate cranial disruption. Injuries so severe that they were incompatible with life on a neurological level. Humberto fell to the ground instantly, his life extinguished not by the car that crashed, nor by the driver who lost control, but by a piece of city infrastructure turned into a weapon by the laws of fluid dynamics. The scene that followed was one of horrific absurdity. The SUV driver survived with minor injuries while the water geyser shot 20 feet into the air, raining down on the street like a mockery of the violence that had just occurred. Emergency responders found a confusing tableau where a pedestrian lay dead a significant distance away, killed by a flying component of a fire hydrant, an event that remains one of the most chilling examples of a hydraulic sniper. We walk past these devices every day, assuming they are for safety, never suspecting that under the right, rare, and terrifying alignment of physics, the pressure contained within them can transform a piece of iron into a homing missile, proving that Humberto Hernandez was in the right place, but existed in the wrong millisecond where a car, a bolt, and water pressure conspired to turn lethal. In every story today, a gap of 2 meters or 1 second meant life or death. Let's play a game of fairness in the comments. If a piece of urban infrastructure kills a pedestrian, should the engineer responsible face the same prison sentence as the murderer? Or should we accept human error as the price of civilization? Be ruthless in your verdict below. Like the video and subscribe now.